medical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, good to see you lovely people again. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on the wireless set. Tonight on the show, I'll be joined by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, a professor at Stanford University, to talk about the new documentary by Leighton Woodhouse and Michael Shellenberger called The Censorship Files. You can imagine what that's about. I'll then be joined by the man himself, Michael Shellenberger, to look at how exactly we can go about protecting our freedoms. I'll also be joined towards the end of the show by the headmaster of a leading preparatory school in Sussex, which has appointed, if that's the right word, a chat bot, an AI presence as a principal head teacher. All that and lots of chat with my amazing panellist and friend, Tom Buick. But first, an update on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Neil. Our top stories tonight. Fresh weather warnings for snow and ice are in force until midday tomorrow for many parts of the UK. Forecasters say temperatures could drop to -12 in parts of Scotland. The Met Office has also issued an amber warning for Cumbria, saying some areas could see up to 15 centimetres of snow. Meteorologist John Hammond says the cold temperatures won't last that long, though.
The focus of the cold shifting northwards, something a bit milder trying to push in from the south. Then the cold air sweeps back south again, later on Monday into Tuesday. So we're not waving goodbye to this cold spell just yet. I think through the middle of the week, potentially further severe frost. And then later on this week into next weekend, a complete transformation. It's going to turn mild, wet, windy, soggy and horrible.
A British soldier killed in Kenya was just days from finishing his tour of the country. Major Kevin McCool was off duty when he died on Wednesday. His father says he was shot while on a motorbike trip. The 32-year-old had served in Europe, the Middle East, the Falklands and Africa. Joseph McCool paid tribute to his son, describing him as special, and his family's incredibly proud of his achievements. An 84-year-old man who died following a huge house explosion in Edinburgh has been named locally as James Smith. The blast, which happened in the Baberton area last night, was heard from several miles away. Mr. Smith is understood to have been in a neighbouring property. A 43-year-old woman and a 54-year-old man were taken to hospital. Police say there are no suspicious circumstances. Football fans who were charged following clashes in Birmingham on Thursday night have now been granted bail. A special court session has been taking place after violence erupted ahead of the Aston Villa match against Legia Warsaw. Almost 30 of the defendants were granted conditional bail, including a 22-year-old Polish woman who pleaded not guilty to violent disorder. West Midlands Police saying that 5 officers were injured after several Polish fans were told they wouldn't be allowed into the stadium. Train drivers have been braving the cold to attend picket lines across the country as they begin a week of industrial action over pay. Commuters are facing 7 days now of travel disruption. No East Midlands trains are running today and there's a limited service between London and Scotland on LNER. ASLEF members recently voted to continue walkouts for the next 6 months. The rail delivery group saying that they should accept an 8% pay offer. But Shadow Culture Secretary Thangam Debonair says the government needs to start negotiating.
Strikes help none of us, the working people who want to get to work, people who want to get to visit family and friends. It's really important that these strikes are settled as soon as possible. And I really hope that the government and the unions can negotiate that and a fair settlement as soon as they can.
The US says it will not permit the forced relocation of Palestinians from Gaza or the West Bank under any circumstances. Vice President Kamala Harris made the comment on the sidelines of COP28 in Dubai. She also says the US won't allow the besiegement of Gaza or any redrawing of borders.
The United States is unequivocal. International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Frankly, the scale of civilian suffering and the images and videos coming from Gaza are devastating. As Israel pursues its military objectives in Gaza, we believe Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians.
And finally, Boris Johnson's expected to admit that he made mistakes during the pandemic when he appears before the COVID inquiry next week. However, the former PM is expected to argue that he got the big decisions right, helping to save tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives by preventing the NHS from being overwhelmed. Some of his senior staff have already given evidence. They've been criticising him for indecision and poor leadership. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get straight back to Neil.
Santa's making his list about now, checking it twice, finding out who's naughty or nice. Sad to say those lists are already being compiled, not by Mr Claus, Esquire, but by those in assumed positions of power. A glance across the water at Ireland makes plain the putting together of the naughty list is well underway. Legislation hustled through Parliament there in the aftermath of riots after the stabbing of children and their teacher outside their school gifts authorities astonishing new powers of surveillance of the Irish people with a view to seeing who's naughty or nice. But the genesis of the theft of freedom predates any recent unrest. Back in 2022, politician Pauline O'Reilly talked openly about how she and her colleagues were working to shorten the leash. Quote, "That's exactly what we are doing here," she said. "We are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good." The common good. Fear the common good like no other state cover for theft of your rights. Santa sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Santa's surveillance is the least of it. More and more, it's clear an unholy alliance of governments, banks, big tech and intelligence agencies is making a reality of round-the-clock surveillance of citizens. They'll know what you've been reading, they'll know all that you've said, they'll decide if you've been bad or good, and they'll put the mockers on your bank account and generally make your life unlivable or throw you in jail if you put a toe out of line. In another life, what feels like 100 years ago, I was part of a team at British Telecom taking care of content on the company's website. Back in the mid-1990s, it was only the third website to exist in Britain. I found the internet even more confusing then than I do now. And among a slew of questions I had was how and why everything was free. Free software, free access, millions of pages of information about anything and everything. I couldn't work out why something so amazing was free to all comers. Cui bono, you might say. More recently, I realised it was all about baiting a trap, all that convenience, so much for nothing, in return for just handing over more and more personal data to persons unknown. And here we are, flies stuck on one big web with spiders that know more about us than we know about ourselves. Genius, really, but then it was the idea of the US military. For the longest time, the internet was a place of anonymity, no names, no pack drills. Now that anonymity has been identified by the powers that be as the final obstacle standing in the way of total control, which reminds me of something else I learned at BT. In the early days of the telephone in the US, an undertaker called Almon Brown Strowger was convinced he was losing business to a rival undertaker whose wife was the operator at the local telephone exchange. Whenever anyone called looking for an undertaker, she always connected them to her husband's business. And so Strowger invented an automatic exchange that took human operators out of the loop. Now the connections were made by an unthinking machine and no human could watch or interfere. Now, 140 odd years later, it seems to me the authorities would prefer they could step in again, see who's talking to who, what they're saying, whether it's right think or wrong think. The new legislation in Ireland gives the state unprecedented power to pry into what people are reading, writing and saying online. If a policeman wants to see what an Irish man or woman has been looking at online, reading online, he can demand access to mobile phones, computers, tablets, whatever. Where that kit is protected by a PIN, the policeman is empowered to demand it. Failure to comply could lead to prosecution and a year in jail. Stop and think about that. No more privacy. And flunkies of the state deciding in advance of any evidence of wrongdoing whether you or I are likely suspects. A judge decides if you seem likely to circulate a document, a meme, a link, and so makes a judgment about whether a hate crime might be committed in the future. Here we have nothing less than the advent of thought crime, or even pre-crime as it was imagined in the sci-fi movie Minority Report. Santa checks if you've been bad in the past. Now we face a future where myrmidons of the state can decide arbitrarily if you might be bad in the future. In Ireland, as elsewhere, the necessary legislation for the prosecution of so-called hate speech has been in place for decades. And in cases where such has been applied, been shown to work perfectly well, the new legislation is only about surveillance, the right to pry and to punish in advance. And it goes without saying this will hardly be limited to Ireland. If the past 3 years have taught us anything, it's that small, well-regulated populations are used as test beds for the next bright idea from the authoritarians. I'm thinking about how Israelis, Australians and New Zealanders, for example, were made the lab rats of the most draconian steps taken during the COVID debacle. What is seen to empower the state in Ireland will surely spread like a virus that really does put everyone at risk. Populations in societies where state reach is already powerful, what they call strong state capacity, as in Israel, Australia and New Zealand, to name but three, may be regarded as pre-programmed to trust authority more than they ever should. I see the meek acceptance by too many of restrictions and measures that ought to put the fear of God into every freedom-loving human being is manifesting now as something akin to Stockholm Syndrome, where captives sympathise with and so take the side of their captors. Independent US journalist Whitney Webb talked this week about her recent research into the coming together, the marrying in hell of US government, big banks and intelligence agencies with plans to cope with the latest thing we're being prepped to fear, which is cyber attack. The World Economic Forum is already talking openly about and actually predicting a catastrophic cyber attack in 2024-25. This is the same lot that predicts, along with Bill Gates' World Health Organization, imminent pandemics worse than COVID. Ask yourself how it is these unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats know all this is coming and when it will arrive. Ask yourself if perhaps they know it's coming because it's they, like Santa's evil twin, who will deliver it to our doors under cover of night. Webb has pointed out, and she's hardly alone, that a catastrophic financial crash must lie in our future. Trillions upon trillions of dollars, pounds and euros of debt are suspended over all our heads and must surely collapse. How to subtract all the money from every private citizen in the world and still have all the fabulously rich left over? According to Webb, the authorities in the US and throughout the world cannot allow the blame for all the attendant harm to arrive at the doors of Wall Street and the rest of the financial institutions. They saw the global anger narrowly diverted back in 2008 when the banks were gifted hundreds of billions of taxpayers' money and have since moved heaven and earth to make sure that when it happens again, and it will happen again, banks and governments aren't left carrying the can. What better cover, what better way to shift the blame than a global cyber attack that shuts down those banks, energy grids, closes the hospitals, disables the emergency services, disables all that's been made dependent upon the internet? And if that cyber attack can be blamed on, well, let's wonder who that might be. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, any of those will do for a scapegoat. And with the populations of the world quaking in fear in the face of chaos and shivering and hungry, what better time for centralised agencies, a cabal of banks, NGOs and compliant politicians and the rest to step in with the solutions? In the US, the Patriot Act was rushed through just 45 days after 9/11 under the guise of making us all safer in the face of terrorism. It gave the US government the right to monitor phone calls and email exchanges, collect banking and credit records, and to track the activity of Americans on the net. In Britain, the Online Safety Bill has handed big tech the power to decide what might be misinformation, disinformation or malinformation, being true things that the authorities don't want you to know. Big Brother Watch described it as a Frankenstein's monster of a bill that will set free expression and privacy back decades. I've quoted US President Herbert Hoover before and will again. Every collectivist revolution rides in on a Trojan horse of emergency. It was the tactic of Lenin, Hitler and Mussolini, and emergency became the justification of the subsequent steps. This technique of creating emergency is the greatest achievement that demagoguery attains. What better opportunity to explain to us how the solution depends upon making the internet a fully regulated space, safe from anonymous hackers, that the road to utopia is paved with digital IDs, that every person's access to the internet, to email, to social media, to their bank accounts must depend on them offering up a digital ID that dispenses with their anonymity and their privacy and enables the state to monitor in real time anything and everything a person might read or publish or do online. Once the digital IDs are accepted by desperate, angry, frightened populations, what do you think the state might do next? CBDCs and social credit scores, anyone? Amazon and Microsoft are among the tech giants standing ready to unite with government, banks, intelligence agencies and entities like the United Nations, the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Joining me this evening is Tom Buick, friend of the show. Tom, what do you make of my assertion that more people should be worried about what's happening in Ireland?
It's good to be back. Merry Christmas to you, Neil. Any rush legislation, in my view, is folly. I mean, you mentioned the Patriot Act there, but just listen to your monologue. Although it's been a while, it hasn't lost any of the potency that I've come to hear from you, Neil. But as ever, you take quite a gloomy view of human nature. I think you take a slightly quasi-conspiratorial view of the technology and some of the people that might be behind it. That's not to say I don't think there are some real worries about a surveillance society, whether that's the new laws, draconian laws, in my view, that have come out of the Irish Republic. But we need to look at this, in my view, as a glass half full and a glass half empty. You know, there's technology in your pocket, in my pocket, on my wrist, that can monitor my health. If my daughter, not that she's, I hope, listening, turns up a little bit late and I'm worried about her, I can track through my phone and her phone where she is. In other words, you know, as Edward Snowden said, we are, all of us, walking around with a spy in our pocket in the surveillance society.
These are technologies, though, that you are adopting for your own reasons and out of choice. What my contention is why, when these measures are, for example, being run through the Parliament in Ireland, why aren't more people utterly aghast and up in arms that any government would seek to have the police able to demand the PIN to see what you might have been looking at on your phone that you might choose to circulate to somebody else? I mean, what kind of level of intrusion are people going to finally push back against?
Yes. Well, we have the same huge intrusion. You mentioned the online, what was the safety bill? It's now an act of Parliament. We've had previously the Regulatory Investigative Powers Act in this country, which gives GCHQ and our intelligence agencies probably more sweeping powers, actually, than the intelligence agencies have in Ireland. But your point is about, at what point do we push back on this surveillance society? And I think the answer to that is about how do we democratise this digital age? How do we ensure that, whether it's the big tech firms, whether it's the banks, whether it's elites in our governments around the world, that actually they are subjected to our democracy.
Are we though not sleepwalking into a situation where we are guilty until we prove ourselves innocent? This concept of a zero-trust society where the onus is somehow on us, the law-abiding taxpayers, to demonstrate to the myrmidons of the state that we are going about our private business.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we're both very keen students of social history. You know, go right back to the Magna Carta, this idea of, you know, freeborn people being free from arbitrary arrest. It seems to me we've lost some of these basic liberties, these basic principles that, frankly, our ancestors fought for. The question that I come back to is, what is the mechanism, therefore, for democratising this digital age? How do we ensure that actually these intelligence agencies and others cannot collect huge amounts of data on us without asking for our permission? I think that's one aspect of it. But what I wouldn't want to do is to lose sight of the fact that, you know, with 2 billion people on this planet who have no access to any digital technology, bank accounts, for example, or any financial services, live on less than $1 a day. Sure, I think of us decamping here and going off to Outer Mongolia and living in a yurt. I don't see what the alternative is to connecting with this new technology.
Say no to digital IDs. That's my number one message. After the break, which is upon us now, I'll be joined by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Professor of Medicine, Economics and Health Research, to talk about the case of Missouri versus Biden and look at why the First Amendment is a powerful idea that shouldn't be going anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified on playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. My first guest tonight is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, joining me from the States to discuss a new documentary by Leighton Woodhouse and Michael Schellenberger called The Censorship Files, which asks how much we would pay for our own freedom. Let's take a look at the film.
Moments of real terror at what's going on and the potential for tyranny. To see it happening is shocking.
If the Supreme Court says that the government can coerce, pressure, work with tech companies to censor speech, I don't think that the First Amendment has any meaning anymore.
Especially when you have a crisis situation that you need the First Amendment.
The so-called counter-disinformation units have basically become counter-dissent units. The powers of the state and Silicon Valley are merging.
Hopefully, by the wonders of technology, Dr. Bhattacharya joins me now. Are you there, Dr. Bhattacharya?
I am, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's good to see you. Good to hear your voice as well. You are one of the authors of the document that's gone down in legend now as the Great Barrington Declaration, and it advocated targeted protection of those vulnerable to COVID rather than the rest of the measures. When you published it way back when, how did you expect it to be received?
I expected there to be an honest discussion among public health professionals about how to better protect vulnerable older people. I expected there to be open schools. I expected there to be an acknowledgement that what we had been doing, the lockdowns, had been tremendously damaging. Instead, Neil, what we got was censorship, smearing, suppression. It was really an absolute a disgusting attack, a propaganda attack on the Great Barrington Declaration and its authors.
And after all, I think I'm right in saying it ended up with tens of thousands, not just thousands, but tens of thousands of names associated with it. Nobel laureates, all sorts of eminent people had put their names to it. And as you say, this campaign of ridiculing and silencing and the rest, but you are fighting back. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're finally pushing back?
Yes, tens of thousands of doctors signed it. The attack on it, I think it really, in reality, was because tens of thousands of doctors, including Nobel Prize winners, signed it. We had shattered the illusion that there was a consensus in favor of lockdowns. What happened afterwards was essentially a campaign to smear us and make sure the public never heard of us. The head of the National Institute of Health wrote an email to Tony Fauci calling us fringe figures and calling for a devastating takedown of us. What we found later on, about a year later, I was contacted by the Missouri and Louisiana Attorney General's office. They had had the idea that the Biden administration was coordinating some of the censorship efforts. In this lawsuit against the Biden administration, this Missouri versus Biden case, we had the right to read the government emails to social media companies and to depose people like Tony Fauci. And what we found was that the idea that we were being censored was not a conspiracy theory, but was actually happening in fact. What the government essentially was saying, it was telling the social media companies that if you don't censor these people and these ideas, ideas that were true, things like the vaccine doesn't stop transmission, that it has some side effects, that the lockdowns are harmful, all of these like basic facts, scientific facts, the government found inconvenient. And so what they did was they said to the social media companies, if you don't censor these people and these ideas, we are going to go after you with regulatory action. They threatened the business of the social media companies. It absolutely was a violation of our free speech rights. I was put on a blacklist at Twitter the day I joined in August 2021, simply for the crime of posting a link to the Great Barrington Declaration.
Dr. Bhattacharya, bear with me while I bring in my guest in the studio. Tom, that is quite some testimony, isn't it?
It's absolutely outrageous that there are eminent scientists and academics that have been put on blacklists, and that should never happen. But we've seen, haven't we, in terms of our own government here with the Cabinet Office trawling Twitter accounts, just in general looking for anyone that doesn't go along with, if you like, the government's narrative, not just on the vaccines, but on a whole range of issues, and they've been deplatformed from conferences where government ministers and others are appearing. So much for free speech, and I think your guest there.
Indeed, I mean, Dr. Bhattacharya, indeed, so much for free speech. Was your worldview, has your worldview been changed by what you saw and what you experienced over the last few years?
I mean, I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen. I had the idea of the United States as the civic religion of the United States is free speech. I've been absolutely stunned. And Neil, it's not simply just that it happened in the past. When I've testified in front of Congress, what I've found is that major elements of the Democratic Party view this as a social good to keep the censorship apparatus in place. I mean, I can understand that my opinions about the pandemic were controversial. But science often involves that kind of controversy. And certainly when you're talking about some of the most consequential decisions that governments have ever made in my lifetime regarding public health policy, we needed a debate. We needed an open discussion. The government did the public a disservice by not allowing that debate. I mean, I believe very firmly that the science was on my side during the pandemic, that closing schools was damaging and didn't do much for protecting anybody, that we should have protected vulnerable older people better. I think that we would have won that debate. But I think that is the fundamental reason why the censorship effort was needed, was because the government would have lost that debate had it been allowed to take place in open air. Instead, they needed to use these underhanded methods to make sure that people didn't hear about me, or if they did, they would hear about me or Senator Gupta or Martin Kulldorff or others of the tens of thousands of scientists who signed the Great Barrington Declaration, as if we were fringe figures rather than eminent scientists.
Why do you think it happened when it did? I mean, since time immemorial, emergencies have befallen societies, and governments have acted, and so on and so on, and scientists and other experts and people from many fields have offered their opinion. Why, in response to this particular event, did suddenly the glove, the mask came off, and we were confronted with what was perhaps the reality of government all along?
I mean, I think a relatively small group of scientists somehow convinced the public, and particularly the politicians, that if they weren't adhered to, listened to, that the public would be harmed, that the millions of people would die, and I think as a result of the pandemic. The problem was that this group of scientists did not actually have a consensus behind them. But now, once politicians became convinced that these scientists were onto something, that you had to impose these extraordinary measures, well, how do you keep a lockdown in place? How do you keep a family from sending their kids to school? How do you keep to tell people that they should? It's good for society that they lose their jobs, or that they stay isolated, or they can't visit their mother in a nursing home, or your father while he's dying. That you can't hold a funeral. The only way you do that is by convincing them that every scientist agrees that there's a consensus behind this and really is for the social good. And so they needed the censorship apparatus to destroy the possibility for the public to learn that there were scientists, eminent scientists, that disagreed with those relatively small group of scientists that controlled government policy.
Astonishing testimony, Dr. Bhattacharya. I've run out of time, I'm afraid, but I hope we'll be able to pick up and continue with this conversation at another opportunity. Thank you very much so far this evening. Another break then, after which I'll be joined by the director and creator of the Censorship Files, Michael Shellenberger. Don't go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live We were just discussing the film The Censorship Files, and my next guest is the man who wrote, directed and produced the documentary, along with Leighton Woodhouse. Michael Schellenberger, Twitter Files journalist and founder of Public, joins me to discuss the international censorship industrial complex. Good evening, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
It's good to finally be able to meet with you and talk with you.
Oh, me too. The feeling's mutual. Now, Michael, the First Amendment to the American Constitution, the amendment about free speech, is it just words on a piece of paper? Or does it still mean something?
Oh, well, that is maybe the most important question that should be asked right now. You know, our founding fathers, the people that created the United States of America, they wanted to do things differently than it had been done in Europe. We did not want the king to decide what we would be allowed to say or not say. We wanted speech to come before government in a certain way, and that's why it became the First Amendment of the Constitution. But the people that created the United States of America, they knew that the First Amendment only worked so long as the American people really believed in it, and that's one of the things that's been challenged. We saw the percentage of Democrats who want the government to be involved in censoring false information online rise from 40% to 70% between 2018 and 2023. So it's very scary. Now the switch, of course, is that many conservatives, because they've been censored, are now more supportive of free speech. So we're in a very strange situation, which you've talked a lot about, but I think the potential here is for free speech to have support from the political right in the United States and to gain support from a minority of people on the left who still believe in free speech. You might say classical liberal types like myself. And so, but yeah, that's the test, and that's obviously why we want the documentary. There's a big Supreme Court case in the United States that's being heard. We testify in front of Congress. There's all of our journalism, but ultimately it's just as you said, that people of the United States must believe in free speech for us to have free speech protections.
Now, you talk in the trailer, and I played the trailer earlier in the show, you talk about moments of real terror in the face of the tyranny you see being assembled. And that's strong language. I feel your pain. Talk me down off the roof, if you will. Give me reasons to have some kind of confidence of being able to push this terror away.
Well, I think the strongest reason to have hope is that we can see so many people around the world want to come to live in Britain. They want to come to live in the United States. They want to come to live in free countries. And people would rather have freedom than not freedom. Now, I think there's some percentage of people on the left in the United States and in other Western countries, including Britain and Europe, that were temporarily willing to sacrifice some of those freedoms in the case of a pandemic. That's often the instinct that people have during other crises. We think it's the wrong instinct, that in a crisis you need free speech to be able to understand what to do. And that's the conversation you just had with Stanford Professor Jay Bhattacharya. That we need free speech in order to solve crises, but the elites use fear to get people to give up these fundamental freedoms. I think we have to slow people down a bit. There's this distinction that the famous psychologist Daniel Kahneman talks about between fast thinking and slow thinking. When people think about it, they would rather have freedom. They would rather have free speech, free expression. They would rather be able to speak their mind. That's why so many people are trying to come to the United States and to get into Europe from countries that do not respect those fundamental freedoms. And I think that ultimately is what we have to remind people of. We have to remind people that this is an existential question, an existential moment for liberal democratic civilizations in the West, and that it starts with a defense of free speech.
Now, you tweeted recently, this week I think, you said, "Today we have ripped back the veil of the censorship industrial complex and are on the cusp of defunding and dismantling it." Now that's bold and heartening language. Are you as confident as that we can do enough to save our traditional freedom of speech?
I do. I actually feel more optimistic than I have in the year since we've discovered that military intelligence and other security organizations in the United States and other Five Eyes nations, including Britain, first and foremost in Britain because of our special relationship, I feel much more optimistic now than I did when we first discovered this. I think that the high point of the censorship industrial complex's power was in April of 2022, when the U.S. Department of Homeland Security announced a disinformation governance board, which was rightly criticized as Orwellian, both in name and in purpose. And there was an enormous backlash by the public against that. The Twitter files emerged 8 months later, and we're now a year since that point. And I think that we see people advocating censorship on the defensive. I just tweeted earlier this morning that one of the people that testified, the lead witness for the Democrats who testified on Thursday, denied in her testimony that she had called government censorship a conspiracy theory, even though she had done so just an hour earlier in her testimony. And I think that's testament to the fact that both people are struggling to defend censorship when confronted publicly on it, and also that they are now starting to even deny their own claims that it had just been one of our conspiracy theories. Of course, I don't need to tell you and many of your listeners, but there was no theorizing. We were discovering evidence of a conspiracy to secretly censor people, and we believe break the First Amendment of our Constitution, break the not just any law, but arguably the most important law in the country.
The most important law in the country. Tom Buick, it seems to me that the whole problem is exposed, at least now. Whether there are grounds for optimism, whether we can dismantle it. It'd be right to say, wouldn't it, that we can see that the censorship that was dismissed as conspiracy theory was absolutely the case?
Absolutely. I think most of the population know that we live in a mass surveillance society, and I think they take sometimes steps to ensure, whether it's writing via email or whatever they do, they look to try and sort of protect their privacy. But I think what Michael's talking about there, in terms of course, we don't have a First Amendment right here in the United Kingdom. But neither, it seems to me, do we have as yet the mechanism actually to democratise freedom of speech and ensure that there are limits actually to the powers that the state can take to surveil us. It seems to me that all the legislation goes one way. It's always through emergency type legislation, taking further and further liberties away from us. And, I was looking at the Democracy Report, the latest one, Neil, just earlier. 10 years ago, the world's population, less than half the world's population, were living in authoritarian states. That's now gone up to 70%. So, more and more of the world's population are being led by autocrats and tyrannical leaders. And I wonder to what extent we in the West are fueling that surge because of the activities of our own governments.
Michael, while I still have you, my central concern in many respects is, do you think enough people care? Do enough of us properly pay attention to the absolute essential nature of the freedom to speak?
Well, I think the answer is that we haven't been paying attention to the importance of that. I was asleep to the threat. I think many of us were. I think many of us were asleep to the threat of tyranny, and that COVID really woke us up to that threat. I was also alive to that threat around my work on climate change, which has also been used for advancing creeping authoritarianism and even totalitarianism. I think you've done such important work of communicating this threat to people and explaining it to them. And I think the answer is that things have been changing, and people are, I think this is the key. When you stop to think about your fundamental freedoms, most people don't want to give them up. We take it for granted that we have the right, not just to say what we believe, but also to hear what other people believe. Because of course, freedom of expression goes two ways. It's not just that I want to speak my views, I want that, but I also want to hear your views. And I think we need to come back to basics to some extent to reaffirm these freedoms. I will say I was in Washington. I met with a number of members of Congress. I met with a senator. The question of how to prevent government bureaucrats from behaving like totalitarians and attempting to censor us is very much alive in Congress. There is legislation that would prevent government officials from demanding censorship from social media platforms. We hope for a win in the Supreme Court next year. but we shouldn't rely on that. And I also will just add, we need a grassroots movement for this. This is why we do believe, and it's why I wanted to speak with you. We think that our relationship between the United States and Britain is particularly important in affirming a common movement for free speech. And it's why some of our best allies are in Britain. It's why we published a free speech manifesto called the Westminster Declaration, because we met in Westminster area of London. And it was an internationally signed document, including signed by John Cleese and Silke Carlo and Ben Dilo and other Winston Marshall and other people that were important British leaders for free speech, and we have Americans as well.
Michael,
we think our movement's growing, but we have to keep the fight.
Just running short on time, Michael, but honestly, it's so reassuring to listen to you. And actually, against my expectations, you have lifted my spirits. You have actually been able to say the things that give me cause for optimism. So thank you so much, Michael Schellenberger. Another break, after which the headmaster of a prep school in Sussex will tell us why he has introduced a new member of staff to the classroom. This one's a robot. Don't go anywhere.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. My final guest tonight is the headmaster of Cottesmore School, a boarding prep in West Sussex, which has worked with an artificial intelligence developer to create a robot to assist in every conceivable way. The robot's called Abigail Bailey and has been a total hit with the school, apparently. And Tom Rogerson joins me now. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Was this your idea? Was this your call?
With other people's, input as well. But yes, it was my idea.
Why? Why in a school with all of that, you know, all those resources? Why did you perceive a need for artificial intelligence?
But just before I say the answer to that question, we've been talking to a lot of academics and a lot of people who've advised us, and actually, Abigail Bailey is a very humanised name, and you know, the various other things, giving it the title that it has, and you can hear that I'm saying it rather than her. And so we depronouned it, and we've created a logo for it, and so it's now more like a Siri or an Alexa, and it's called Abby now.
What presence does that entity have in the school? Can the kids see it? Can you interact with it in that one-on-one way?
So it's more of a joint head. It's more of a co-pilot, and I use it for strategic leadership help. You know, my deputy head, you know, he works very long hours, but very often, maybe at 9:30 in the evening, I'll be wanting some strategic help on something, and I can't call upon him. I can, but it would be really bad for me to call upon him. And so what I do is I clarify my own thoughts using this bot.
Education is your bread and butter, Tom. How do you respond to this evolution of the educational model?
First of all, it's obviously very zeitgeist that you managed to establish the correct pronoun for this chat bot, but it. So, look, I think in terms of the benefits of artificial intelligence, it's why I like to call it actually augmented intelligence, because it clearly is a great tool. I mean, I've used it in my day job organisation, everything from you can write lesson plans, and you can write job descriptions, or rather you get ChatGPT, which only launched a year ago. By the way, it has 180 million subscribers already, ChatGPT.
Wow.
I think it's the biggest take-up ever of an online system. So, of course, this so-called generative AI, these huge language models, they're very different from Google, which just spews out a load of facts. So from that point of view, of course, it's going to augment the educational process. I think the challenge in terms of where the education sector is right now is, you know, about 60% of educators think this is the best thing since sliced bread. About 40% say this is going to potentially put teachers out of work. This is going to automate the whole business, or worse still, plagiarism and cheating will be rife.
How does the school experience this presence? What do they actually know of it?
So Abby is only one of the AIs that we use. So we have other AIs as well. And so what one can do is create let's say, a Richard III bot, or a Plato bot, or a Socrates bot. And you can use those to deliver the programs that you want to deliver.
So can the pupils interact with the entity?
So we are more interested in the conversation at the moment. That's where we sit. And so the adult-facing AI is much more interesting to us. However, we have, with a lot of supervision, we have had these bots in the classroom, and it's been completely brilliant. It's a genius piece of kit, and I would thoroughly recommend people using it. I think the problem is we need to be careful of GDPR. As I listened to you before, GDPR and safeguarding. And so at the moment, I'm more interested in the adult-facing AI. And I think this is where we are.
Is your school's experience unique, or is the same project elsewhere?
I think a lot of schools, I think we have been leading the fray, as it were, but I think there are a lot of schools that are using AI, yeah, absolutely. And for us, it's been a case of wanting to use our sort of enthusiasm to help everybody, to help state school teachers. I'm a member of a group of state school teachers, and to help everybody to benefit from this. And just in case we run out of time, I wanted just to say the whole point of this generative AI enthusiasm is that I want to be able to tell everybody.
I'm going to have to jump in just for want of time,
okay,
Tom.
Sorry.
But thank you so much to my panellist, Tom Buick, and to all my guests this evening, and to you, Tom. I'm sorry we ran out of time. Now it's the Saturday 5, but before that, your latest weather from Ellie.
Looks like things are heating up. boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. It was a very cold and frosty start for many of us this morning, and there's been quite a few wintry showers across western coasts. These are brought about by some occlusion features across parts of western Scotland, northwest England, into Wales and southwest England too. Quite a bit of snowfall across parts of northwest England with an amber snow warning in place. Some roads becoming impassable this afternoon, but that snow will gradually start to ease into this evening. Elsewhere though, further south, those showers continue to push in from the west, turning to snow across parts of Wales and the Pennines as well, where we could see up to 10 centimetres through Sunday morning. Another chilly night across the UK, but perhaps just a touch milder across the very far south. So a milder start across the south, but a much cloudier and showery picture too. Showers continue to push in from the west, and with those cold temperatures perhaps bringing some icy stretches through Sunday morning. For Scotland though, it'll be a much drier and brighter day. Plenty of sunshine and blue sky around into the afternoon, but still feeling cool and cold despite that sunshine, -1 in some places. Further south, a milder picture, but a little bit windier too, with winds coming up from the southwest. Monday starts a wet picture for many, with hail snow across parts of Wales into the south of the Pennines as well, but that will eventually clear its way south and eastwards as we go through the day on Monday. Further north across Scotland, northern England, a drier picture, plenty of sunshine around, but that rain and cloud slowly clearing its way south and eastwards through Monday, leaving a drier and brighter but colder day for many on Tuesday and Wednesday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified on playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.